You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. This week, the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition highlighted their emissions agenda, a package of clean energy legislation they hope to get through here in the spring session. Joining us now is Jen Walling, the Executive Director of the Illinois Environmental Council.
Thanks.
Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Cole.
So this package of bills specifically highlights three areas. What are they? What are the plans here?
Sure. So the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act addressed the power sector. And one of our bills follows up on that with transmission, capacity, and storage, all of the needs that we have to make the renewable energy infrastructure work more successfully. So that's a piece to lower emissions from the power sector. Next, we have a large package to address all of the emissions from the transportation sector, which is the largest source of carbon emissions, of climate change emissions now in Illinois, and it addresses all aspects of the transportation sector. And the final piece has to do with emissions from buildings. So the way that we heat and cool our homes to make sure that it's done efficiently, affordably, and safely.
So let's start with the grid then, because this has been a conversation now ever since the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act passed. There's been conversations about the capacity that Illinois has because of these renewable projects, and there's been a lot of conversations about the struggles of getting those new wind farms, solar farms, everything connected to the existing grid. This is about expediting those transmission line projects, correct?
Yes, so it's about the whole infrastructure of the grid. I think everybody, whether it's our friends over at coal or nuclear, everybody is looking at transmission and capacity, that we're going to need 5 to 7 times more transmission to make energy more successful and reliable in Illinois. So this is about getting those projects in the ground faster, cheaply, efficiently, and in a way that benefits consumers and the environment by reducing climate emissions. It's an incredibly important piece, and one that I think we're not the only people that want to see addressed, and this is our take on how we can do that successfully.
So the problems, the sort of roadblocks that these projects have been running into, is that just something that I wonder how you would characterize those problems. Is this something that was maybe overlooked in the initial Climate and Equitable Jobs Act? You didn't realize this might be slower than possible, or is this the structures already in place kind of dragging their feet?
Yeah, I think that this is a wholesale look at infrastructure within Illinois. We have great transmission, but I think that there's discussions going on about where we build, so there's putting the projects in place and how we fund those projects. The discussion we had last year about right of first refusal was really a funding discussion about how do we fund these projects, what do we pay for them. I think everybody agrees they need to be built by our friends in labor to make sure that they are people who are paid well and have fair wages and great employment conditions. But that's what we're looking at with transmission as a whole. How do we make sure it's cheap, efficient, and reduces carbon emissions, bringing in renewable energy from other states, but also taking our renewable energy and moving it other places. I think we anticipated that there would be some of these issues as we built more and more renewables, and we haven't hit any type of crisis point at all yet. But we are concerned about the way the regional grid operators might look at the different parts of the state. So we want to be really proactive in making sure that what we put forward really addresses the original goals of CEJA, and that's why this legislation is needed.
You mentioned right to first refusal that popped up at first last session, but then had some conversations about it, especially early on this year. And I wonder, is this sort of the response to that? Because right to first refusal was the power company saying, hey, we can do this a lot faster if you let us do this. And
yeah.
Is this sort of the response from the Clean Jobs Coalition to that idea, you feel this is the better way to do it?
Well, I think we've been talking in parallel about how to do transmission projects, and that one just highlighted a disagreement because they're like, oh, we can do this faster and make sure that it's labor friendly. We already feel the other companies in competition are labor friendly, and it would slow it down because we think there would be lawsuits over the right of first refusal. So I think that this is a piece to look at I don't know that it's a response. I think it's a parallel look at transmission and looking at our principles of being cost effective to consumers and reducing carbon emissions and being labor friendly as some of our top goals.
So going to the transit aspect now, you mentioned this is now the biggest emissions output in the state now. And with this in particular, we're talking about all transit. We're talking about people's personal cars. We're talking about city buses. We're talking about the big semi-trucks constantly running through the interstates of Illinois. How do you approach that when we're talking about so many different categories of transit?
Yeah, we approached it through, there's an omnibus bill, but there's also several other bills that we're looking at. And there are a number of items with the transportation sector that are sort of colliding at one time. I think we look overall at the transportation sector and emissions are increasing. We're getting, going back to larger cars, less fuel efficient vehicles that are on the roads, semi-trucks and other trucks that, they've reduced some emissions, but especially in certain communities, they have a lot of emissions. And so we're looking at traffic patterns. If you're caught in traffic, you are increasing climate emissions. So how do we reduce vehicle miles traveled as a whole? By making other options more convenient for people. So how do we make public transit convenient, clean, and safe? We're not doing that right now as we've hit after the pandemic. I think there are people who are nervous about public transit. They're nervous about active transit like biking and walking. How do we prioritize and make those things safe, convenient, and just desirable for folks? So we're running into, with the pandemic, there was funding from the federal government to supplement our transit system. We're going to run into what we think is a $1.5 billion shortfall in the Chicago region, the Chicagoland region, with respect to public transit. And so how are we going to fund that and improve our operations, improve the efficiency in all of public transit? So it addresses electrification, it addresses public transit, it addresses the active sources that we use, it addresses vehicle miles traveled. I think people think, for example, on the vehicle miles traveled part, we'll just add another lane to this road and then we'll reduce traffic. But study after study shows if you add another vehicle lane, eventually that just gets filled up with cars as well. So we need to be providing people with other options so that we don't have as many cars on the road, that we're decreasing the vehicle miles traveled for Illinoisans.
Governor Pritzker, as a part of his big push for electric vehicles, for instance, I'm blanking on the exact number he threw out there, but he had a really ambitious goal over the next 10 years for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And how much of a role does that play in this? And it really gets to that same root problem, which is breaking people's routines or making people think about these kinds of aspects that are just a total routine part of their daily lives, making them think about it differently. How do you go about that beyond just the policy?
That is a really great question, because I think there's making the electric vehicles available, and I think Governor Pritzker, through his manufacturing and incentives, has done a great job, and there are different standards we can put in place to make them more available. The infrastructure is being built, but we still have challenges, but then there are the cultural issues. So I just brought an electric vehicle. I just bought a Chevy Bolt. And I, for example, don't have my own parking spot or garage. So I rely completely on public charging for my vehicle. And there's definitely some pieces of inconvenience at first and a little bit, I'm nervous, is it gonna make it? Am I gonna get here? But I'm finding I have to be different in the way that I power my vehicle. So instead of stopping for 10 minutes at a gas station, I'm charging when I'm stopping at the grocery store. I'm charging if I'm going to a nail salon. I'm finding one that has a charger nearby and charging during that time. I'm finding places to go to the gym that are by a charger. And those are things I would be doing anyway, and my car would be parked. And instead of just sitting there, I'm fueling it up, and for much cheaper than I was before. So I think once folks get into it, they'll understand, especially folks that have charging at home. It's so convenient, and if you're just somebody that commutes back and forth to work, you could reduce your fuel costs tremendously and have a lot of convenience. So I think it is a culture shift, and I think we're gonna get there. But it's something I've been experiencing myself.
I wonder with this kind of, when the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act passed, that was never the end all be all. That wasn't going to be, okay, now we're going to hit our goals in 2050, everybody can go home kind of thing. But I wonder when you bring these new packages of legislation and you re-up a lot of these topics, what is the conversation with lawmakers? Has that changed? Has there been not a pushback on the environmental issues, but is it harder to get some of these not trailer pieces of legislation, but follow-up pieces of legislation through?
I actually think it's getting a lot easier. You know, I've been in this particular role for 13 years, and I remember in 2016, there was an anti-climate change resolution that was advanced in the Illinois General Assembly that got more than 50% of the members of the House. And you know, we watched that. It was frustrating. But when we look at the General Assembly now, we have a majority, and maybe even a supermajority, that understand climate change, understand the potential impacts and costs to Illinois, and want to act on it. So I think while we've used some of our power in passing the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, you know, I think we continue to build the power that we need to move forward on additional climate change legislation, and that we're going to continue to do this. I think lawmakers are seeing the impacts in their district, where constituents are getting solar panels, where constituents are getting jobs in new industries that weren't previously open to them, where we can see the air impacts of what's happening to folks and how it would be helpful to clean up things like diesel pollution from trucks. So lawmakers are going back home, they're seeing positive impacts of all of these programs, and I think they go through their elections, their voters are calling for it, and they want more. Illinois lawmakers understand and want to act on climate change. They may not want to act at the pace I'd like them to act at, but I think that they understand where we're going, and think this is the right direction to go in.
All right, well, Jen Walling, the Executive Director of the Illinois Environmental Council, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.